The whole Brexit mess is still rolling on, but if you're a regular to the channel, you know that at the cost of views, I generally don't like to be too reactive unless a story is something that's really grabbed me or seems that it's important to discuss in the immediate. I much prefer to take a step back and take the kind of overhead view of everything that's going on. And after doing a more reactive video yesterday, I think I'd rather take that step back today. I mean, things are still ongoing. Any reaction that I make is going to be outdated by the end of the day anyway. There's a vote today on whether to extend Article 50, and then May is going to try yet again to force her deal through Parliament at some point next week. But I want to take a moment and step back and look at the traitor narrative. Comparisons to the 1920s and 30s are everywhere at the moment, with the rise of the populist right and the populist left and so on. And we are seemingly going through a kind of repeat, albeit with the volume turned down slightly. Rather than a Great Depression, we had a Great Recession, and we're still feeling the knock-on effects of that. And from roughly the same kind of time period between the Great Depression and the problems that caused later on. There's a lot of blame passing going around. We haven't had any major global wars. We've had a lot of brushfire wars and oil wars and things. There's definitely simultaneously a resentment that we've been dragged into all these eternal wars everywhere, and a lionization of the military, which is a key component in genuine fascism. But what's been most interesting to me as a historian is to look at the parallels of the traitor narrative, that somehow we're being controlled or betrayed and so on. It's particularly febrile in America, but we are seeing the same thing over here, and again particularly around Brexit. We've seen that rhetoric coming from UKIP, we've seen that rhetoric coming from Nigel Farage, we've seen it coming from some of our YouTube talking heads who really ought to know better, but I suspect a combination of an echo prison and chasing the algorithm and wanting to keep the subscribers and the fame and the power that they've accrued is making them, to some extent, go down that path. But that's an incredibly dangerous path to go down. It is the path that gave rise to the Nazis, the idea that Germany had been betrayed by the ruling class, by the Jews and all that after World War I, the punishing treaties that were signed to keep Germany under control and to disarm it and so on after World War I. And that rhetoric has been winding up in relation to Brexit, and I think that's quite unfair and dangerous, and people ought to know better, and I want to talk about why. The idea, for example, that the media is betraying Brexit by standing against it is to a large degree ludicrous. I mean, the tabloid press is practically united in its hatred for Europe because most of it is controlled by Rupert Murdoch, who has less sway over the EU than he does over the British national government, for example. So he's anti. They are responsible for spreading the bullshit and lies over the last few decades about bananas and God knows what else that helped push Brexit. So, we need to be concerned there. There are some more broadsheet, more middle class papers and so on that are very much against Brexit, The Independent, The Guardian and so on. The BBC, how anyone can think that the BBC is slanted anti-Brexit, I don't know. I mean, every question time is loaded with gammon. Often former UKIP council members or candidates, all kinds of people like that, and it definitely gives more of a voice to the anti-EU lot than the pro-EU lot, and the same is true of a lot of their other discussion programs. They tend to go a bit soft on the pro-Brexit people. Why? That's a whole other video about the degeneration of the BBC. Maybe I'll do that at some point. But the idea that the media is betraying Brexit is ludicrous. It's very much weighted in favour of Brexit in terms of circulation, audience, and so on. And alternative media seems to be dominated by anti-EU voices, against which I'm woefully inadequate. So we can't really say that the media is betraying it. Is the political class betraying it? Well, that's a much more interesting question, I think, especially given the recent actions of some in the pro-Brexit crowd. When you elect someone to Parliament in the UK, you're electing them as an individual, not as a party member, and this has often been an argument against switching to PR, that we would lose that local link. But the truth is that parties have long dominated British politics to the extent where that local link is practically meaningless anyway. It's come back a bit lately with people defying the government and freely voting regardless of whip lines and so on, but still, that's not the way our democracy is supposed to work. It's not supposed to work on party lines, it's supposed to work on you electing the individual. We're also a representative democracy, which means you're electing someone to represent your interests, not your opinions. So it is perfectly just, perfectly correct under our electoral system for our elected representatives to take positions that their constituents, that the population does not, because they are supposed to be better informed, better able to make these decisions, and can make decisions that are the best for the people under them. That can seem patronising and all the rest of it, but it's not really. I mean, consider an example outside of the current Brexit paradigm and all the heat that's poured onto that. The death penalty. The death penalty was repealed by the government in this country, despite remaining pretty damn popular with the population. Why? They had access to the statistics, the police reports, how many people were wrongfully hanged and so on, the expense of running all these things, and they decided, given all that information, that it was not in the public interest to continue executing people. And it's only very recently the public appetite for execution has dipped below 50%, finally. But throughout all that time, there were repeated decisions in government, in Parliament, to defy the will of the people, if you like, and to not bring back execution. When it comes to Brexit, there is no good Brexit. The best deal is the deal we have on the table. This is something these people know, and it's only the disaster capitalists and the ideologues that think that it's worth the cost, because they either want to demolish the existing political order or they want to clean up financially from what's going on. So it's not traitorous for members of Parliament to vote against May's deal or any deal, or to vote to repeal Article 50. Those aren't the actions of a traitor. Those are the actions of someone putting national interest ahead of their personal interest and their electoral interest. That's people showing leadership and making the hard decision against the wishes of the people, but for the good of the people. And again, that can seem patronising or whatever, but these are people who are in a better position to understand that. To really put this traitor narrative when it comes to Parliament into perspective, and when it comes to Brexit, to put all that into perspective, I think you have to compare the actions of people who genuinely think that they're doing the right thing for their constituents, even if it's against their constituents' will. And you have to compare that to the pro-Brexit politicians who have been going around to the more right-wing governments that have emerged in Poland, Hungary and so on, asking them to block any extension to Article 50 to try and force the UK government into a no-deal scenario. This is people like Farage, like others, going to other countries and conspiring with them to do harm to our country by blocking the political will of Parliament in the EU. That strikes me as being much closer to treachery than doing what you think is the right thing and staking your your career, your future, your political future on that. The idea that Theresa May is betraying Brexit is perhaps the most peculiar narrative that I've seen coming out of the right wing. Theresa May seems to be the only person that believes in any kind of negotiated settlement, and there isn't the will in Parliament or the country at large, less so as every day passes, for a hard Brexit, just a no-deal Brexit that would completely annihilate the country in many, many ways. She seems to be the only person that really wedded to making some kind of soft-ish, some kind of reasonable Brexit happen. Not that there really is a reasonable Brexit to happen. The idea that she's betraying Brexit when she keeps trying to force her deal through Parliament, despite catastrophic, record-breaking defeats, rebellions in her own cabinet, practically unheard of, all of these things. The idea that she is betraying Brexit is absurd. She's betraying the country by trying to force through something that can't work and is going to cause enormous harm to the country. But the idea that she and her government are betraying Brexit is absurd. They are the only chance you Brexiteers have of really getting anything through. And she seems monomaniacal in her intent, her insistence, her persistence to push her shoddy deal through, which pleases absolutely no one, but it's the best Brexit you're going to get, quite frankly. Now look, we've already had one murder during the campaign for the referendum, which just shows how heated this gets, particularly amongst the kind of paranoid whack job fringes. I think that's less likely to happen on the pro-European side, but I could see it happening. I could see pro-European terrorism or whatever happening. I mean, there are lots of people with very personal and important things on the line: romances, families, careers, jobs, you know, the kind of stuff that does make people snap when it's put under threat. I think it's far more likely, though, on the pro-Brexit side, the anti-European side. And I guess I'm appealing to people to stop using this traitor narrative. Try and see the other side in the best light. It's difficult for me to see the best light in the pro-Brexit side, but I try to understand, and I try to take the most charitable interpretations that I can, which is mostly that people have been misled and lied to, and it's very hard to admit when you've been conned. But there's some people who have parochial local reasons to back Brexit that I can understand, but I don't see much of that charity on the other side, all this waffling about elites and so on. An elite is someone who is knowledgeable and an expert. Isn't that the kind of person you want making decisions on your behalf? You would think. Apparently not. But if we can just take some of this heat out, if you can stop with this betrayal narrative, because history tells us that it is an incredibly dangerous line of discussion to go down. So I'm appealing to you, please, people like Sargon and others who have these big audiences, please tone down that rhetoric, because it is thoroughly dangerous and it's disingenuous. The people you're calling traitors aren't betraying the country. They're doing what they think is right for the sake of the country, at potentially great personal cost. And you can disagree, but you should respect that, and you shouldn't want them dead. And that's the way the betrayal narratives go. Please stop. Zang.
Order! 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 There's simply too much noise in the chamber.